Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to react to the college football playoff rankings, which were released on Tuesday night. Blake, if you've listened to our podcast and you figured the committee would go by resume, no huge surprise at Tennessee at number one. We kind of called that within the last week, especially if Tennessee beat Kentucky, which it did. The Vols have got big wins over Alabama at home, road at LSU, Kentucky at home, also Florida at home, Pitt on the road. That's probably as good of a set of 5 wins as anybody in the country's got. I don't know if that's how the committee saw it, but in any case, Tennessee number one heading into week 10 of the college football season, according to the college football playoff ranking.
I don't know why anyone would be shocked by that. We said we pretty much expected it. Again, it's all based on what they've done to this point. And I mean, what they've done is, like you just mentioned, you roll off a lot of really good wins. And when you compare it to everybody else's wins, I mean, I don't know how anyone could have been surprised by Tennessee being in that number one spot. Whether you believe that they're better than, Georgia, whoever, which, as we said, all that's irrelevant at this point because we'll find out on Saturday. But, that's just, it's all about what you've done to this point. And I think just basing it off of, the first 9 weeks or whatever, Tennessee has certainly put together a body of work that I think, Chris, makes that conversation way more interesting because, now you look at the setup for Tennessee on Saturday. Obviously, if they win, and let's say they, certainly win the rest of their games or whatever, get to the SEC championship. Let's say they were to lose a game, lose to whoever it is, right? Alabama or an LSU or somebody. I think Tennessee's still sitting in a spot where they're getting in just based on their resume. So I think that kind of is an interesting thing to think about. Obviously, you're never, going in saying, oh, well, if we lose a game, let's play this scenario. But I think just, again, based on what the committee values, clearly, you're looking right at it, and I don't think there was any doubt that Tennessee was going to be number one here.
Well, the one certainty for next week's rankings is that there's going to be an SEC team in there because Georgia's number 3. Obviously, the winner of that game is going to stay in the rankings. It'll be interesting to see what happens to the loser. And frankly, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the league. I mean, we have thrown out this scenario there a lot. What happens if Georgia beats Tennessee, Georgia and Alabama go to the title game in the SEC, and then Alabama beats Georgia because you get that whole 3-way team of 3 SEC teams with 1 loss. That is making a lot of assumptions. Alabama's got a lot of work to do. It's got to beat Ole Miss and LSU. But then you have that whole, would the playoff committee put 3 SEC teams in the playoff? I'm guessing it would not, but how do you break the ties? We are getting way ahead of ourselves. But that's the thing I just kept thinking over and over. Now, a lot of that depends on what happens elsewhere. I think the winner of Ohio State, Michigan is probably going to be in there because I look and Ohio State's remaining games, the other games are Northwestern, Indiana, and a road trip to Maryland. Maryland, the only remotely challenging game in that bunch. You've got Michigan's got games with Rutgers, Nebraska, Illinois. That one could be interesting, and then Ohio State. So really, you've got 3 teams in the SEC, and I group this. I know Clemson cracked the playoff rankings at 4. In my opinion, I think the best 5 teams are those 3 SEC teams and the 2 Big Ten teams. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But there's going to be a lot of scoreboard watching, and I think the Big Ten's got a pretty clear path to a spot at some point, unless either Maryland or Illinois pull upsets in those games.
Yeah, I mean, Clemson's the team with the least margin for error. I mean, I think that's pretty clear at this point. I mean, they're the one that absolutely cannot lose a game. And, it's like the rest of them, perhaps you can make arguments, although I think the one for Michigan now, certainly gets, if they lose to Ohio State, right, I think that's it. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, just based on where they're ranked in the initial set, and I think a lot of that has to do with their schedule, or their non-conference schedule specifically. I would certainly look at that because who did they play? I know they played Hawaii. They played UConn,
Colorado State, and Connecticut. That's 3 of the 10 worst teams in the FPS right now.
Yeah, and so I guess their best win would be. Let me pull up
Best
It
win
would
would
be
be
Penn
Penn
State.
State.
Yeah, I was going to say it
And
has to be
Maryland
Penn
is a
State.
nice win too. Maryland didn't crack the top 25, but that's a good win. And
Yeah.
a win at Iowa is a quality win. I know Iowa doesn't have an offense, but it does have a defense. Michigan State, I don't think that means much. Beating Indiana does not mean a lot, though that was on the road.
So the scenarios I think are pretty clear. I think it's Tennessee's path is beating Georgia, and then I think even if you win out and you lose in the SEC championship, I still think you're sitting right there, right? Because I think that's a spot that you feel pretty good about. Now Georgia situation where I assume it's somewhat. I mean, if you beat Tennessee and you went out, you go to the SEC championship, you lose to an Alabama. I mean, I think Georgia's probably still in. But again, a lot of that will depend on what happens with Clemson, what happens with these other teams. But I think that's the thing, right? It's like if Michigan, let's again, we're playing a lot of hypothetical scenarios. But what do you do at this point? Like this is what we do
Yeah.
because these are the college playoff rankings for Week 10. There's a lot of football to be played. But it's like if Michigan beats Ohio State in that game, then what happens with Ohio State? Do they still like? There are a lot of the questions like that. I think that you have to certainly. That's why this is so fun because you do have quite a setup here in terms of having three SEC teams that are in the top six. And like we said, I mean, I think it's Alabama's the one that already has a loss, so they can't. I don't. They can't afford to have another loss. I just think this whole setup when you really look at how all this could play out. I think any other scenario, again, to me, this is all based on Clemson because if Clemson wins out, then I mean you have to assume they're going to get in, right? I mean,
Yeah. To that, I was looking at 538's playoff odds, and Clemson, I think, had a 99% or greater chance of getting in, according to its calculator. If Clemson wins out, that's a really neat site, by the
well,
way.
they go to
That
Notre Dame
playoff
this weekend,
thing.
though. Let's keep that in mind. Like, I think
Yeah.
that's a tricky game. I'm not saying the upset's gonna happen, but I mean this is not. I don't know. Like this, we've talked about Clemson before. There's no reason to keep going into it, but I mean, this is a team that we talked about on some of the other shows we've done. But like, it's just, I don't know. I think we'll see. I mean, this is clearly the last game. I think because their last three games are at home against Louisville, Miami, South Carolina. I
Yeah.
mean, I think they're winning all three of those. But I think this is that one where, and still got to play the ACC title game. But I think this is going to be kind of. We'll see about this one. So.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to nitpick, Louisville's getting a little bit better. Um,
I mean,
so
Notre
there's that.
Dame
That might.
just beat down Syracuse. Like they won
Right.
41-24. So I mean, that's a Syracuse team that had been unbeaten to that point. So that's something to consider too, I guess. So
But by the way, how about the ACC getting as many teams in the top 25 as the SEC did?
yeah, that's true. By the way, I forgot
Yeah.
Syracuse did lose to Clemson. I want to make that note. I realized they lost that game too, but just pointing out that was a good road win for Notre Dame, which makes the Clemson game a little bit more interesting.
Well, the other thing, just as a minor point, I was a little surprised Mississippi State didn't get in the top 25. State has, that's a top 15 team by a lot of the computers for whatever that's worth. I mean, and we're getting into the whole, are you good versus what's your resume and how do you slice that, which was interesting. Obviously, it looked to me like the committee went resume. With Tennessee, which I have no problem with. But I don't think Clemson, honestly, to me, Blake, and I'm looking at scoring margins, and these five teams all have scoring margins of 26 points or more. Now, the strength of schedule is going to vary. Michigan has played an easy schedule. Ohio State has played an okay schedule. Georgia's not really played a particularly strong schedule to this point. Alabama's played a very tough one. Tennessee's played a fairly tough one. But you've got five teams that have all got scoring margins of 26 points and a half or more. Those are Ohio State, Georgia, Michigan, Tennessee, Alabama. Clemson, statistically, frankly, not super impressive. Scoring margin of 17.2 a game on a per play basis. Clemson is averaging 5.8 yards, giving up 4.9. You look at those top five teams, The worst team on a per play advantage is Tennessee at 2.2. So it's going to be very interesting to me because I think, to me, clearly you have a top 5 teams in the country. I know Alabama's lost a game and could have lost another game to Texas, but look who Alabama's played. It's going to be very interesting to see how the committee deals with that going forward.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's I mean, we'll see. There, like I said, there's still a lot more to be determined here, and I know that we know why they do this at this point in the season. It gives everyone a kind of an idea of where things are at. But as we know, the rankings are going to change this weekend. Like it's just that's how it's going to be. Like people are going to switch spots. Whoever Georgia Tennessee winner is, going to be right there. I assume Georgia probably moves to 1 if they beat Tennessee.
I would think so.
I wouldn't. Yeah,
Well,
I think
Ohio
they would.
State. Ohio
I
State
know.
could take the spot.
I guess. I mean, that's something too. I guess you have to consider. But again, we're playing what if scenarios here. But I think that's it. I think Georgia's the team to keep an eye on here because and it's funny to say that as the reigning national champion, but like I said, if they lose this game, which they're mentioned they're more favorites than we thought they'd be in this one, and we'll talk a lot more about it on our live stream on Wednesday night. But if they lose this game, their path really starts to shrink a bit. Whereas I think with Tennessee, there's still some wild scenarios, like we said, although it's probably unlikely, assuming both teams went out and Georgia's the representative in the East, then you're really just trying to hang on to, trying to get one of those spots. But that's where you're playing the watching game of Clemson and Michigan and Ohio State. And so, yeah, it's going to be quite a finish, I think, for the SEC to see who gets in it. And let's not forget about Alabama either, because
Yeah.
there's certainly still a path for Alabama. Like especially, they have to win this game this weekend against LSU. But that path still exists for for Alabama to get there. So let's not forget them as the number 6 team on the board there.
Before we leave, don't let me forget to get into TCU versus Clemson because I think that's kind of interesting. Okay, Tennessee. Here's the problem for the Vols. If they were to lose to Georgia, the 538 playoff simulator has Georgia with a 35% chance of winning that game. We both picked Tennessee, incidentally, in our picks this week. If Tennessee loses that game, okay, I think they've tweaked the odds overnight. Okay, well, no, I'm sorry. If Tennessee wins the game, it's got a 74% chance to get into the playoffs, which still seems low to me. If it loses the game, it drops to 33%. I think the problem is the problem is Alabama down the line somewhere. I think it's the whole – maybe it is baked in a scenario here where Tennessee's not a conference champion in that scenario. I'm guessing because I'm trying to figure out how the odds drop that low in its model. Maybe it's flawed.
Here's my thing. Even if Tennessee gets to the SEC championship and loses to Alabama, they already have a win against Alabama. So could you really keep them out based on the split? I don't think you could in that scenario.
Well, this is a scenario in which it loses to Georgia. So Georgia would have to lose another game somewhere. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm having a little bit of a hard time. And again, this is 538's playoff generator. It's not us telling you what we think is going to happen. But they've got I think a pretty decent model. I'll tell you the one I didn't understand was kind of Clemson and TCU. Clemson is higher, I think, in most of the computer rankings, but there's some computers that are not huge on Clemson. I don't know what that factored into the committee's decision-making. Scoring margin, they're both about the same. TCU 17 points, Clemson 17.2. TCU much better on a per yards or per play basis, 1.9 per play edge to Clemson's 0.9. Clemson, in my mind, has played a weaker schedule than TCU. TCU has beaten Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Kansas, SMU, West Virginia, and Colorado. Colorado's awful. Clemson has beaten Wake Forest, Syracuse, Florida State, NC State, Georgia Tech, Boston College, and Louisiana Tech. The last 3 aren't very good. I'm really struggling to understand why an unbeaten Clemson ranked several spots higher than TCU. I don't really get that one.
Yeah, probably if you're TCU, your path right now, like you said, it certainly seems like a tall task, I think, just based on the initial rankings. So I mean, we'll see. I think, like I said, the Clemson one I think is the one that a lot of people are going to look at. But like I said, at the end of the day, it's just these teams have to keep winning too. And like I said earlier, Clemson's the team. I feel like, well, obviously TCU is as well in that conversation, but it's where you lose a game. I think that's where you start to go back to the SEC, Big Ten, you know, invitational in the college football playoff because I think that's but like we said, there's just we have to keep in mind, right, that a lot of these, well, we know that the two SEC teams, Tennessee and Georgia, are playing each other. We know Alabama and LSU, which LSU, if they win this game, then, they move up a bit because where were they? LSU was 10th, right? Um,
Yeah.
so obviously that's going to give them a little bit of a boost up. It's still a team, as we said, with two losses, so they would certainly have to win out to at least make things interesting and win the SEC championship. Um, but I think these teams are going to play each other. Like I said, Michigan, Ohio State are going to play each other. What's the significance of a loss in that game? Like we just said, what's the significance of a loss in Tennessee, Georgia? We know what the significance of a loss is in Alabama, LSU. So I think those are the kind of things you look at. And then you've got the Clemsons and the TCUs that, without question, Chris, I think it's safe to say these are teams that have to run the table. Like they cannot afford, I think, to lose. Well, again, we say that, right? But it's all dependent on what happens around you too. But I think it's
Yeah.
pretty clear that these are things that, like we said, that factor in and strength of schedule and strength of record and all that. So we're having fun with this because this is what we see right now. But as we said, this is where things are to this point and nowhere near finalized.
Okay. I'm playing around with the playoff generator, and again, this is not factoring anything else in there. I guess this is just taking the result of what 538 thinks is going to happen independently. If LSU wins out, of course, it's the SEC champion. At that point, a two-loss LSU, an 84% chance
Mm-hmm.
to make the playoff. Ole Miss, don't forget about the Rebels. If Ole Miss were to win out, and by the way, if LSU were to win out, that would mean beating Alabama, road trip to Arkansas, UAB, road trip to Texas A&M. Losses would be to Tennessee at home and then a neutral site game in the opener to Florida State. Okay, Ole Miss, it gets a 65% chance to get in. According to the playoff generator, that includes a 56% chance of winning the SEC under that scenario. Okay, you would have, in that case, Ole Miss would have to beat Alabama at Arkansas, Mississippi State. That would be three really good wins. So there you go.
It's a lot of scenarios that's kind of fun. I think the LSU one will surprise some people because I think there are a lot of
Yeah.
people looking at LSU and saying, "Oh, they've got two losses and they're ranked 10th in this thing." But like we said, you just mentioned the numbers, the predictive numbers there. If they were to win out in the SEC, which again is the only path that gets them there, um, they're getting in. I mean, I'm just saying, like even with two losses, they win the SEC and they beat the teams. They beat Alabama. They'll beat the SEC East representative. You just talked about their schedule the rest of the way. Again, this is a lot of what ifs, but LSU would get in. Will get in if they are the team that wins the SEC and wins every game they play the rest of the way. But that's again that's the only path to get there.
A
But
lot of ifs.
um,
Well,
a lot of ifs.
LSU's wins are, they're the only team to have beaten Ole Miss, got a win against Mississippi State, both those at home, one at Florida, and beat Auburn, and then an awful New Mexico team that's probably a bottom 10 team in the FBS right now.
Yeah. I mean, there's still strength to being the SEC champion. And in that scenario, they would be the SEC champion with two top 10 wins over in Alabama and an SEC, either Georgia or Tennessee. So, yeah, we'll see. I think, like I said, a lot of unknowns at this point, but doesn't matter where you are now. Matters where you are in about, whatever, month or so. So there you go.
Want to run some quick scenarios and offer some final thoughts. Before we do that, shout out to our sponsor, Stakes. They're our presenting sponsor. That is STAKES. You can predict better than the crowd for a chance to win NFTs. With Stakes, players can cement their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Stakes and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. Free to play, fun to play. You can beat us and brag about it. Just go to Stakes. Help us out and have some fun while you're at it. Okay. Playoff generator. I'm going to go through, and of course, some of these are going to self-destruct because, like, for instance, Ohio State and Michigan are going to play each other. Alabama's going to play one or more teams here probably if it gets to the title game and so on. If Ohio State wins, it's got a 99% or greater chance of making the playoff. Georgia, same thing. Clemson, same thing. Tennessee, same thing. Michigan, same thing. I don't know what's just happened to Alabama here. Oh, I know what I did. Okay. Alabama, 98% chance. So I don't know what the difference is. I guess it's the one loss on the board already. If TCU wins out, it's got a greater than 99% chance of getting in. Oregon, 69%. UCLA, 52%. USC, 65%. Kansas State, we haven't really talked about them. Same number, 65%. Utah, believe it or not, still in the mix, 24%. UNC, which I don't think is that good, 61% chance to win out to get there if it wins out. Illinois, wow, if Illinois wins out, of course, that would have some pretty big wins in there, 96% chance. So, man, tons of teams that still control their own destiny at this point. Even Texas, if it wins out, has got a 20% chance according to this.
There you go. Just got to win. Just win, baby. That's all that matters.
That's right.
So just win games and you'll get there. So, well, maybe not all of you, but most of you, 4 of you will get there if you win games. So,
and again, a lot of those teams are going to play each other, so it's not going to play out like that.
No.
But point is, if you were a team, if you're one of maybe 15 teams, you still got a little bit of a shot if you can keep winning.
Yep. Just win.
Which means we should have done the 12-team playoff this year.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, you're not very enthusiastic about that.
No, I'm fine with that. It's just not here yet. It'll be here soon.
Right.
It's just not yet. But yeah, you would have quite a few SEC teams in that scenario. So,
well, we'll also be here soon again. We are previewing every single basketball team for the SEC season. We got most of those out, a couple more to come. We're going to be doing Hoops Power Rankings and Player Rankings. We've got our live stream tonight. We're doing this on Wednesday morning, so we will do that on Wednesday night. We'll have reactions after games, all kinds of stuff. Best way to catch it all, hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. We'll see you again soon.